The ZANU-PF Politburo met today. Let me kick off with this. Vice President Chiwenga is fully in control and likely to become the next president of Zimbabwe. But let me break down what happened in Politburo. Before it began, the president read a speech that they wrote for him. The most important thing to take away from that is speeches are now coming from the machinery, and that sends chills down my spine. It sends the signal of where Mnangagwa stands on the Tagwirei issue, on the record. Today was a brutal choreography of Zimbabwe's political pulse. They say a picture can tell 1,000 words, and if the full cast of the Politburo was there today and you wanted to tell a picture, I'll tell you what I saw on their faces. I saw Chiwenga flanking the president. The order of marriage ranked the room. Obet Mpofu, Opamu Chinguri, Kemba Mohadi. We've seen this exact script before. And if you know your history, you can now predict the ending from the opening credits and sing along to what's coming like a karaoke. Let me state this as a matter of fact. There will be no President Emmerson Mnangagwa after the next election. This is now settled. Yeah, the Politburo broke into applause only once the whole time that the president spoke. Only one time. They applauded when the president said, "We must protect the constitution of the party." As much as it looks like a dark cloud, everything else, including Tagwirei's political ambitions, is still up for grabs. To understand why his $50 million political investment was doomed from the start, we need to travel back to an era where there was another financial savant who tried to buy his way into Zimbabwe's political throne room. His name was Gideon Gono. Oh boy. He spent way more than what Tagwirei is spending now. I remember Gideon Gono at one point put out $500 million US just to try and secure the Central Committee co-option position. And that was just the starter pack of his spending. But he was blocked by the vanguard of the political party after trying almost everything one could try. A young and seasoned generation that understood the direction the party was coming from and going. Gono pretty much became political septic sewage. And I'm bringing this up because this isn't just a coincidence. It's a textbook demonstration of the path of dependency. The party's machinery and its reward systems. Its methods of dealing with outsiders. So I'm going to give you an update on where things are with who is going to be the next president of Zimbabwe. Right now, if you had to ask me to put my money, it's President Chiwenga. Oh, absolutely. Politburo was in session today. And before it took place, President Emmerson Mnangagwa took to give a speech. The most important thing I took away from the speech is that he was reading that speech, which means the words that are coming out of his mouth are now coming from the machinery of the ZANU-PF system. On the record, he's not talking about the Tagwirei issue was as flagrant as if he had spoken about the Tagwirei issue. A picture says 1,000 words. Let me tell you what I saw. So you had in the room Chiwenga flanking the president. You had the order of marriage ranked in the room. You got Opam Chinguri, you got Obet Mpofu, you got Kemba Mohadi. We've seen this exact script before. If you know anything about your history, you can now predict the ending from the opening credits and sing along like you're singing a karaoke. Let me state this as a matter of fact. There will be no President Mnangagwa presidency after this election, in the next elections, sorry. This is settled. The Politburo broke into applause only once the whole time that the president was speaking. And the time they broke into applause is when the president said, and I quote, "We must protect the constitution of the party." As much as it might then make that look like a dark cloud, everything else, including Tagwirei's political ambitions, is still up for grabs. I'm going to break this down for you. To understand why Tagwirei's $50 million political investment was doomed from the start, we need to travel back to an era of another financial savant who tried to buy his way into Zimbabwe's political throne room. His name was Gideon Gono, the epitome of state capture. Let me talk about that. Gideon Gono spent way more than what Tagwirei is spending now. At one point, $500 million US was spent just to try and secure his co-option into the Central Committee, and that was just his spending starter pack. But it was blocked by the vanguard of the political party. There was a young and seasoned generation at that time that understood the direction of where the party was coming from and where the party was trying to go. They made it impossible for Gono until he became political septic sewage. This isn't just a coincidence I'm trying to bring up. It's a textbook demonstration of path dependency. The party's machinery, its reward systems, its methods of dealing with ambitious outsiders. The path was always paved decades ago. Tagwirei is just the latest traveler on a very well-worn road. So let me tell you about Act 1 of the Gono playbook, the anatomy of state capture, the parallels of locus of power. Let me take you back to early 2000. Gideon Gono is the Reserve Bank governor, and he transforms the Reserve Bank into something unprecedented in modern day African politics. In that moment, the Reserve Bank ceased to be a financial institution. It became a parallel locus of power with its own gravitational pull, forcing the formal state to bend to the will of the Reserve Bank. Gono was the consummate apparatchik, a loyal functionary whose primary value lay in the ability to manage the 100 carefully executed details required to keep the patronage state sovereign. The ZANU-PF Politburo met today. If I had to make a call, my call is President Emerson Mnangagwa will be replaced by Vice President Chiwenga. But before the Politburo began today, the president read a speech that they wrote for him. The most important thing to take away is that the moment speeches are now coming from the machinery, you got to have chills down your spine because it sends a signal of where Mnangagwa stands on the Tagwirei issue, and it places it on the record. Today was a brutal choreography of Zimbabwean political pulse. They say a picture can tell 1,000 words, and the full cast of the Politburo was there today. I will tell you exactly what I saw in their faces. You had Chiwenga flanking the president. In the order of merit, the room was ranked. Opam Chinguri, Obet Mpofu, Kembu Mohadi. We've seen this exact script before. And if you know your history, you can now predict the ending from the opening credits and sing along to what's coming like a karaoke. Let me state this as a matter of fact. There will be no President Mnangagwa at the next election. That is settled. He won't be a candidate in the next election. I guarantee you that. See, the Politburo today broke into applause once, the whole time. They broke into applause once. They applauded when the president said, "We must protect the constitution of the party." I am quoting that verbatim. As much as that might make then things look like a dark cloud, everything else, including Tagwirei's political ambitions, is still up for grabs. I will explain. To understand why Tagwirei's $50 million political investment was doomed from the start, we need to travel back to an era of another financial savant who tried to buy his way into ZANU-PF's political throne room. His name was Gideon. Oh boy, Gideon Gono. Gideon Gono spent way more than what Tagwirei is spending now, right? I remember at one point, $500 million was spent just to try and secure a central committee co-option, and that was just the starter pack of his spending. But he was blocked, not just by the vanguard of the political party, but there was a young and seasoned generation that understood the direction of where the party was coming from and where the party was going. They made it impossible for Gideon Gono to become a central committee member, effectively making him then become political septic sewage. This isn't just a coincidence I'm bringing up. It's a textbook demonstration of what is called path dependency. The party's machinery, its reward systems, its methods of dealing with ambitious outsiders. The path was always paved decades ago. Tagwirei just happens to be the latest traveler on a very well-worn road. The number one act in the Gideon Gono playbook was the anatomy of state capture, the parallel locus of power. Let me take you back to early 2000s when Gideon Gono transformed the Reserve Bank of Zimbabwe into something unprecedented in modern African politics. In that moment, the Reserve Bank ceased to be just a financial institution. In fact, it became a parallel locus of power with its own gravitational pull, forcing the former state to bend to its every will. Gono was the consummate apparatchik, a loyal functionary whose primary value lay in the ability to manage the 100 carefully executed details required to keep the patronage state solvent. But this sleazeball had ambitions beyond being Mugabe's economic prime minister. Gideon Gono wanted the throne itself. Here's what this political savant understood. In Zimbabwe, neo-patrimonial system, access to resources is the lifeblood of political ambition. Ask anybody in politics. So he created what I call the quasi-fiscal arsenal, a sophisticated system of programs designed to buy loyalty and punish opponents, and create an indispensable role for himself in the party's survival. I'll walk you through Gideon Gono's greatest hits. I won't focus on the personal things he actually did for President Mugabe, like building the entire Gushungo dairy, because understanding his playbook, Gono, is understanding why Tagwirei's current strategy was always going to fail. Remember Gono's Operational Sunrise in 2006, where he marketed the slogan, the populist slogan, "Zero to Hero." This was pure political theater disguised as what he then called a monetary policy. Gono gave the public a mere 21 days to exchange all old bearer checks, deliberately creating chaos that punished the informal economy and equally served as the number one opposition to any concept of recovery economically. Then Gono introduced the farm mechanization scheme. This was, my God, patronage on wheels, literally. Hundreds of millions of dollars worth of tractors, remember, combined harvesters, I remember irrigation equipment was distributed not to productive farmers. It was distributed to, firstly, a handpicked of the country's ruling elite, high court judges, government ministers, ZANU-PF officials, all of them receiving free agricultural equipment. What was the most brazen vote buying scheme in probably Zimbabwe's history? And then Gono brought in a program that was called Bakosi. Remember that? It stood for Basic Commodity Supply Side Intervention. Gono weaponized hunger itself, creating a nationwide vote buying scheme through subsidized food hampers. I mean, Gono was, you have to give it him, he was an absolute maverick. He turned groceries into political ammunition, making survival contingent on political allegiance. But here's the genius. Even though it failed, here's the genius of Gono's approach. It wasn't just about buying loyalty. Gono actually understood that in ZANU-PF, you cannot create a political ex nihilo. Power must be drawn from the party's deep wells of history and struggle, not simply conjured out of a checkbook. Gono was very surgical. He spent more than $290 million on each province and bought a cargo plane of paraphernalia to distribute. But let's go to Act 2. Gono is a founder of the Meet the People Mirages. There was a political commissar in ZANU-PF at the time. His name was Webster Shamu. And Webster Shamu went on these things he called road shows with Gideon Gono. Nothing could be more dangerous and telling of a fall to come. Ask Grace Mugabe. Gideon Gono was the initial instigator of those Meet the People rallies, provincial tours that would later become Grace Mugabe's political poison. At the time, the political commissar, I say it is Webster Shamu, he would go around the country and Webster Shamu would hold Gideon Gono's hand, introducing him as the man he met most similar to Tongogara. This wasn't just political theater. I mean, this was a masterclass in political hagiography, an attempt to become a saint out of a banker. But here's what Gono misunderstood. The power that comes from a checkbook is ultimately Esat's power. It's a substitute for real currency in ZANU-PF. Let me try and make this make sense. Like any limitation, the checkbook breaks under pressure. The governor's hubris, Gono. I remember going into Gono's office at the time I was working in the Ministry of Youth when Gono was at the height of his power. I was with the permanent secretary of Ministry of Youth, Prince Mpazariwo, and when we got there, there were streams of government officials waiting outside to see Gideon Gono, bumper to bumper, ministers who wanted to see him. When I entered the office, I was frozen in time. Gono had a personal chef in his office. I saw the a la carte and a culinary built menu that we were served on hotel trays with fork and knife while we were waiting to go in. When you go in, there was two makarads on my baby karadi. One was doing massage, another one was doing pedicure. He had a private butler on standby who would offer you the most exotic beverages, something that looks like an import from a Maldives island. Listen, Gono created the industry we call money changers. There would be runners who would come into his office with supermarket carts like the ones you use at OK Mart and deliver bills of cash. Honestly, like something out of a Pablo Escobar documentary. Every bank CEO stood at attention when Gono called their phone. If Gono called your phone and you were at your house with your children and wife, every bank CEO would stand up and get on attention and they speak to Gideon Gono. This is a guy who he could give a banking license, but he also had enough power to close a bank. In fact, he shut down every black-owned bank, Trust Bank, Kingdom Bank, Royal Bank, because he wanted to be the only Zimbabwean who could bring in foreign currency. At a time, Zimbabwean men were losing complexion, skin, so but gray. If you look at that whole generation, they all have this complexion of like gray. But Gideon Gono's face was halo bright. His skin looked like a cultivated natural fish oil. I remember he sent me back, me and the permanent secretary, and he said, go and call your minister. If he doesn't come here, I'm not going to hear your issue. Gono now said I only talk to ministers, I don't talk to anybody below a minister. At the time when the Minister of Transport was in just before us, and during their meeting, Gono insisted that the door would be left open because he wanted all of us to hear that he could tell the Minister of Transport, Nicholas Gochi at the time, that the president was traveling too much and he would not be funding the president's jet fuel. And then he would, turn around and say, fine, I'll fund jet fuel, but he wanted to let us see the power. We have seen this movie before. Absolutely. There is nothing that Tagwirei is doing that we haven't seen before. Gono was a man who had forgotten the first law of power too, never to outshine the master. Gono had become so intoxicated by his own parallel authority that he began to believe that he was indispensable. But in Zimbabwe's political ecosystem, nobody, and I mean nobody, is indispensable except the one holding the final key to power. Then Gono went on to his Act 3. He deployed his arsenal of command and control. Let me talk about how comprehensive Gono's system was. Okay? Gono would give out these combined harvesters, this sophisticated agricultural machinery. He'd give out these groceries. He'd do the whole bakosi. Gono would give out sanitary pads. Gono would give out underwear. He would give out soap. Gono gave out paraffin. He instituted the agricultural mechanization scheme right at the beginning of what we would then go on to call command agriculture. Gono came in and gave a tractor to every district chairperson in Zimbabwe. He understood that the Reserve Bank had become the wallet that finances whoever was going to go in next. But here's the paradox. Even though Gono spent damn near 2 to 3 billion to buy influence, he still got shut out. Money talks, but power listens very selectively. I remember the former Reserve Bank governor even created hospital programs, understanding that controlling healthcare access was another level of political influence. This was systematic state capture, executed through quasi-financial activities that bypassed all formal oversight. But when people want you out, and you eventually go out, they want you to take everything you had with you. When people wanted Mugabe out, they didn't just want you to leave. They wanted you to make sure you don't leave anybody else behind. When Robert Mugabe left, they wanted him out, his chief lieutenants out, his children out, his closest ministers. Everything had to go, and people wanted absolutely nothing to do with it. This is the brutal reality of Zimbabwe's succession politics. When you fall completely. And now, the Tagwirei parallel. I want to tell you the act of when history finally rhymes. The pillars that cannot be bought. The Untouchables. Let me walk you through the power structure that determines which way the fight of the next president goes. Starting with the key players who cannot be corrupted by Tagwirei's wealth. Okay? Or at the very least, they will not. I'll start with Opa Muchinguri, who's the chairperson of ZANU-PF. Opa can be scared, but if there's one thing I learned from working with Opa Muchinguri during the Restore Legacy and getting Mugabe out and ED in, is she knows the difference between right and wrong. Opa Muchinguri knows the difference between right and wrong. Then you got Obet Mpofu. Now, he's very stable. It's not that he's not corruptible. It's that he is too stable and wants absolutely nothing. In fact, there is nothing you can do for him that he can't do better for himself. So you have a rare state of political autocracy. How do you influence a man who there is nothing you can offer him? That's the problem you have. with Orbit. You can't offer Orbit Improv anything. But then you also have Chris Mutsangwa. This man is going to work the script like a par excellence spin doctor, like nothing you have ever seen. My God, Chris Mutsangwa's role is to be the party's memory bank. His proximity to the struggle is probably the core, but it makes his position sui generis. He's not just another politician. Chris Mutsangwa is not just another politician in the queue. Chris Mutsangwa is the queue. He will guarantee the party because he remembers what it cost to build the party. Oh, then you have Kemba Mohadi. He's a chameleon. Kemba Mohadi will smile at you and then put your throat in connection with the knife right in front of your wife and kids and feel nothing about it. Kemba Mohadi is the master of political arbitrage. How can I describe Kemba? Kemba finds his profit, okay? He finds his profit in the difference between the smile that he gives you and the knife that he holds behind your back. He is probably the most ruthless of the people who will stop Tagwirei. Then you have Patrick Chinamasa, who is going to be judicially expeditious. He will not budge on the party's constitutional process. You are not going to corrupt Patrick Chinamasa because he's already an outcast for not being kind of, chieftained in the ED presidency. So he has a lot of issues with that. And then you come and you try to get ahead of the queue and get ahead of him. Then you have Felix Shava. I think Shava will toe. I think he will toe the tribal line before he toes the party line. He will go wherever ED goes. But ultimately, I think Shava will keep his distance because he wants to stay respectable and he wants to maintain also his stability. I think the president is actually afraid of this dynamic. If there's one person I think does not underestimate, and I don't think anybody should underestimate Chiwenga, is ED. Do not make the mistake of thinking that you are ahead of Chiwenga. Oh my God, what incredible danger you will be making if you do. It is not the favor of the current president in his favor. It is not in the favor of the current president to get involved in this fight anymore. But also a very stark signal of all of this, especially the Polybro today, is maybe Tagwirei should walk away. I kid you not, Gideon Gono was way more powerful than Tagwirei is today. That is not even contestable. If there was an election tomorrow for a burial society and you put up ED versus Chiwenga, right now I think Chiwenga wins. Not because I think there's anything wrong with ED. I just think if you know anything about the tilt of the flick, the tide is not championing ED if you go to an election right now. But here are the material facts that I think matter more than anything to take away. Emerson Mnangagwa will not be president after the next election. General Chiwenga will be president. And if he does not fight for it, he will not be president. Did you get that? General Chiwenga will be president of Zimbabwe in the next election. But if he does not fight for it, he simply won't be. What you have now is a setup where the battle lines have been drawn from the clearest perspective. I also want to say I think Chiwenga is very justified for being entitled. Chiwenga looks at ED the same way that ED looked at Mugabe. Takaita tese, we did this together. And history shows us also that the predecessor never really wants to see the choice that actually gets elected. The one who arunongedzerwa kunzi uyu ndiye arikufana kutora chimuchiri kufana kutorwa na uyu, the one arunongedzerwa kudai seldom actually ever wins. Pointing at who you want to come next after you only works in Saudi Arabia and maybe perhaps with chiefs. In Africa, kunongedzera can be political suicide. But before I bring sense to that, I want to unpack what I also think is the problematic feeding chain protocol that Tagwirei is misunderstanding. And here's the problem with his donations that he's been making, the donations that I think are going to come back and bite him in ZANU-PF. You cannot feed the food chain in reverse. When food comes in ZANU-PF, you must feed from the top down. Yeah, it's a poor man's party, but you cannot feed the district chair and buy him a car before you buy a car for the provincial political commissar. By going straight to the district, which is why Mchangwa said in the press conference the other day, we can just complicate that and give you DCCs. What Tagwirei is doing is he's violating the political trophic levels. You're feeding the herbivores while ignoring the lions. And in this ecosystem, that's a fatal mistake. Mark my words. In the feeding chain, ticket breaks down. Tagwirei's donations will rebound as political poison. I don't believe the hype about the president's chief secretary. I don't expect him to protect anybody but himself. I have no personal issues with him. I just, when I think of the power brokers who are going to decide what happens next, and I look at the president's chief of staff, I just don't, I don't believe that he's will look after anybody's interest more than he'll look after his own. I actually like the man. I have a lot of regard and respect for him. My father thought very, very highly with him, and he was my father's principal many years. But here's the act that is actually going to change everything. I am going to break it down for you what I believe is actually the ultimate game here. And it's the Zigananga strategy. What Chiwenga has done with Zigananga is brilliant. Oh my God, it's brilliant. Chiwenga has created an issue. Let me give you an example why creating an issue is the citadel of political crescendo. Malema is a modern day master of this. When you take an issue, when Malema takes an issue and says the issue is Nkandla, you would think there was no other issues in the country. When he took an issue and he said the issue was the Guptas, you would think there was no other issue. Robert Mugabe was very good at the issue. He did it with education. When he made education the issue, everybody focused on education. He did it with indigenization. He did it with education. So what, in fact, Tagwirei was also very good at this. He did this with change. What I think diluted the PR of President Mnangagwa, and I've always thought there was a miss shot on this, is there is no real issue with President Mnangagwa. The same with Nelson Chamisa. I am not saying that they don't have things that they're doing. I'm saying there is no issue. And when there is no issue, it's very difficult to galvanize people around the radical side of behavior. If Chiwenga presses his foot on the gas with this issue, Project Zigananga goes nuclear. And if there's one thing the Mugabe ouster should have taught us all, is never say that it will never happen to you. Oh my God, who would have ever thought it would happen to Robert Mugabe or Grace? Grace had used to say Mugabe is now sitting at the side of God, helping to decide who enters heaven and who doesn't enter heaven. Chiwenga is going to win on a defining issue, and that issue is Zigananga. Let me go a step further. He has single-handedly shifted the complete overturned window of political discourse within the party. A few years ago, a direct challenge on Zigananga at this scale was unthinkable. Today, it is the central acceptable topic of debate. So if there's anything wrong with Zimbabwe today, if anybody is injured while they're walking on the road, if anybody gets fired, if anybody feels disempowered or disenfranchised, they no longer feel that they can solve the problem through normal channels. They feel better attacking and deflecting the blame to Zigananga. So anything that happens in Zimbabwe, the solution and the problem is all around Zigananga. If Chiwenga does nothing else except keep his foot on the president's neck on the issue of Zigananga, which is pretty much the issue of corruption, there will be no way out for Tagwirei. There will be no way. But I also want to bring in the fact of what I think is maybe the provincial game changers. I think the provinces might also be wild cards in how this goes. I think of the province, the larger provinces. especially the province where Chiwenga comes from itself. That is going to need to play a very big role. And in that province, Tin Mac is king right now. But it's also the province where I think Chinomona comes from. I genuinely believe that even though Chinomona is not afraid to challenge Chiwenga, she is going to practice wisdom and kind of keep a bay. The people who I think are going to be very aggressively pro ED is people like Mbengegwi. I think those are just tribal tours. It's not going to be enough to change the fundamental mathematics of succession, but I think they will always go with the person more than go with the party. I do think there is a problem that certain provinces are for sale in ZANU-PF. The key pillars in ZANU-PF are not for sale. So again, Chris Muchangwa is so pleased. Oh my God, Chris Muchangwa is so happy with what's happening. I'm going to end up a ground Chris Muchangwa so otanga kunyenga ground. Mafariro ari kuita Chris Muchangwa anogona kunyengera ground kunyenga flow nofara. I have seen people get carried and ululated and thrown in the air like you're at a concert when ZANU-PF grassroots are trying to make you feel like uchiitiswa. But then on election day, you always take the bite of the sand. I spoke earlier that seldom do you see very seldom does that happen. The dynamic where a sitting president prefers a successor is generally always rejected in Africa, especially in favor of the candidate, that the president doesn't want. And this is a recurring theme. Let me give you some examples you recognize that illustrate the complex interplay of this type of party influence. Robert Mugabe did not want Emerson Mnangagwa to be next. His plan was to install his wife, Grace Mugabe. But that was appended by a military intervention. Mnangagwa went into power. Thabo Mbeki in 2007 did not want Jacob Zuma to replace him. But Jacob Zuma is the one who replaced him. Likewise, a decade later, Jacob Zuma did not want Cyril Ramaphosa to become president. He was pointing at Nkosazana Dlamini Zuma to say, that's the candidate of my choice. But Cyril Ramaphosa took it. This is not just South Africa and Zimbabwe. Look at Kenya. Electoral results have twice defied presidential endorsements. President Uhuru Kenyatta backed the opposition leader Raila, but his deputy, William Ruto, won the presidency. Echoing the 2002 election, there was President Daniel Arap Moi, the choice of Kenyatta. If you remember Kenyatta in Kenya, he was defeated by, Mwai Kibaki in Congo. President Kabila wanted to handpick Emmanuel Shadari, and that was defeated again because Felix Tshisekedi became president. Because again, whenever you point to saying Duda Uyu, it generally doesn't tend to go that way. Anyway, finally, the most direct form of rejection in this electoral defeat of an incumbent seeking to succeed themselves is in a use case where you have, like a Goodluck Jonathan in Nigeria who tries to replace himself by himself, or Edgar Lungu in Zambia who wanted to replace himself with himself. And it tends to, the wind always goes with the person who orugurambidza kupinda. And that is why we can't look away. What we're witnessing with Tagwirei isn't just political ambition. It's a stress test of Zimbabwe's entire political system. I said this yesterday. It's like penicillin revolutionizing medicine. His case is revealing the antibodies and resistance mechanisms that keep ZANU-PF's core option machinery functioning. There are two people in Zimbabwe who I trust that they know the future. Oh, they know. Chris Muchangwa and Uber Angel. I don't know how they do it. I don't know how those two people have never been wrong whenever they predicted an outcome politically. I don't know how they do it. I just know that they do it. Until next time, head back.